Hi, this is Jürgen Rasmussen speaking. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis blog. This one in particular is about grief, loss, and death, the heavy duty stuff. I've been asked specifically from a few students of the psychological illusion model if I could create a vlog about how to work with grief and loss and death. So if you work with people who have lost someone they love or who have had their hearts broken, a family member may have committed suicide. How do you actually work with these folks in general, and how do you work with them from a psychological illusion type framework? So let me share some insights and observations from my practice in dealing with this type of stuff. Now, first of all, I think when you see people with this particular issue, you will usually see them a while after the actual loss has occurred. So I think in the initial phases, what we call coaching or psychotherapy or psychological illusion work is probably not the thing. I mean, I think initially it's a matter of friends and social support and love, essentially, from people you know and people you care about. Grief is a natural response to loss. If we lose someone we love or someone we have an attachment to, it's very natural to have a grief response. But after a while, the person may end up feeling stuck and end up feeling that it's time to have a different experience on the inside, and this is where you may come in. So these are my kind of insights and observations around the topic. First of all, I think if you're going to work with these types of issues, you really had better sort yourself out. You better be a mature human being with much perspective taking capacity and some care for human beings. Someone who has the ability to be compassionate in a wise way. And in my experience, if someone comes in and their experience is one of being devastated, of having heavy grief, very often the best thing that you can do is to acknowledge that, to be able to say to the person that, what's happened here is truly tragic. This is truly horrible. If someone has lost a child, or they have lost their partner, their life's partner, and they feel heavy grief, and that's their experience, then being able to meet them there and to confirm their experience without trying to save them. I think this is a very crucial point. Feedback I have gotten from people who have had these sorts of experiences is that so very often when they have attempted to share their grief and loss with other people, even therapists and coaches, people try to downplay it or to make them feel better or to belittle it or to have them look on the bright side or throw out cliches. And the one unfortunate consequence of this is that the person often doesn't feel heard or seen, and it becomes self-centered. It very often becomes about the comfort of the therapist or the coach. So what you have to be able to do is that you have to be able to be present with someone and acknowledge their experience without having to save them. So a lot of the time when coaches and therapists try to save someone, it's largely for selfish reasons. They may have unresolved issues around death and a lot of fear around mortality. So when they get a client like that, they attempt to save the client to kind of, fix their own discomfort. But this isn't good change work. So you had better do the necessary sorting in your own psyche, so to speak, so that you can be present in the face of grief and loss. And one way of doing this, for example, is to meditate on death, to contemplate death. In your meditation practice, to contemplate, the impermanent nature of life, the fact that you will die, the fact that everyone you love will die, and to really acknowledge that and to be with that, so that you can be with that in a fearless way. That's very often, because grief in and of itself is not a sickness. There's nothing to cure. There's nothing to fix per se. It's a mind state. It's a thought generated experience. So ironically, very often, the more you try to fix it or to save someone, the more you may reinforce the notion that there's something wrong or pathological with the experience that they're having. So having someone who can meet you and who can just acknowledge that this really sucks, like this truly is tragic, can be very liberating for someone, that you're not trying to save them. Now, I think there's a balance here in that people are, of course, often seeing you because they want a different experience. So being able to meet someone there without having to save them, I think there's kind of a polarity to be balanced. On the one hand, the client has the right to their experience, and their experience is not mandatory. So they don't have to feel this way. It's not a mandatory response. Of course, paradoxically, by embracing their experience and being able to be completely present with it, you very often help the client reduce their resistance to the experience, and things begin to flow and dissolve on their own. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is be extremely careful in not assuming anything. Be extremely careful in not assuming anything. This is especially important because when it comes to topics such as grief, loss, suicide, death, that type of stuff, there are so heavy cultural norms and narratives about what you're supposed to feel and what it's supposed to be like. And a lot of people suffer due to not having the experiences that society at large tells them that they should have. And they therefore conclude that something's wrong with them. So, for example, it's not true that the death of a loved one in and of itself causes grief. Now, it is true that most of us will respond with grief and will make sense of it in that way. But there are people, of course, psychopaths being one, who don't really give a shit and don't love and don't have a conscience to begin with. But there are also very loving people who just don't do grief, who just don't have much of a grief response. It's not that they didn't love, it's not that they didn't care, they just don't process that way. And you might get a client like that who's disturbed by their own peace of mind, or disturbed by their own sense of relief, or disturbed by the fact that they're not disturbed. So you don't want to make assumptions. You want to meet them in a very open way and find out what's going on for them. And very often, in my experience, my job has just as often been people who have different responses than the responses they have been told that are the normal responses. And as a result of that, they kind of conclude that something must be wrong with them, and they end up having a lot of rumination. So if you can help them to see that this is just another experience and that it's completely okay to have this experience, and that they're not the author of it, and that it doesn't say anything in particular about them. This is just another flavor of the human experience. That's very often a great experience. Just recently, I had someone who was deeply disturbed by their lack of disturbance as a result of something having happened to one of their family members. And I asked this person, are you able to, be present with this family member and to help this family member? And the person said yes. Are you doing what's possible to do? And the person said yes, yes, I am. So where would the suffering be necessary? I asked this particular client. How would the suffering help? The suffering, if you were to be more empathetic, would likely result in you projecting your own pain onto this person and being stuck in your own internal stuff, versus without suffering and a lot of compassion, being able to be completely present for this family members. And this client left in a very different state, had a good insights. So, this has happened on several occasions for me with people who have been sexually abused as kids, let's say by their father, and they grow up, they don't hate their father. They didn't necessarily feel fear, they might have felt confusion, and they become teenagers, and suddenly they make two, gruesome discoveries. A, they were sexually abused, and B, they're not traumatized. And the only thing they ever read about and hear about are people who, hate the abuser, and who can't be intimate, and who can't trust anyone, and who hurt themselves, and they're depressed, and their life is over, and so on and so forth. And I'm not saying that people don't have the right to that experience. They do, if that's their experience. I'm just saying that if that's the only narrative that gets offered, if people get trained by educators and mainstream psychologists in the media to kind of think that this is the experience, the mandatory experience that you have to have, then when you have people who have had these experiences and who are not traumatized, they're often traumatized about not being traumatized, meaning they start to think that they might be perverts, or there might be something wrong with them, and then the rumination starts. And then they develop a problem due to kind of accepting the idea that their experience is not okay. So be very, very careful in assuming anything, because the truth is that after deaths and loss and suicide, like, if you can really have a close conversation with a client, you'll discover that people's meaning making and responses and emotions can be all over the place. And you want to be open-minded enough, fearless enough, compassionate enough that the client has the space to reveal what their experience actually is. This is such an important key point. Something else here as well to balance, like in some Buddhist thought, they talk about the middle way, and there's many interpretations of that. But one that I like in particular is, there are kind of two extremist views that people commonly have. One is the conventional kind of Western view where, I'm a separate self in here, and the world is full of separate objects out there. And the other kind of extremist view would be one that says, nothing exists, nothing's real, it's nothing's there, essentially. And I think both of these are extremist views. So on the one hand, the person may have had a family member who died, or a wife that cheated or left them, that's true enough. And simultaneously, at the level of experience, there is no wife or family member separate from the thinking process in the moment. if you can find a way to balance those two. So yes, there is a loss in a conventional way, and you got to honor it if that's their experience. At the same time, when you do name it, find it, you look for the loss in their actual experience. You look for the loss, and you might look for the I that's been left, um, or the I that's been betrayed. So you just use name it, find it in the conventional way, and you look for the loss. And of course, all you'll ever find is images and sensations and emotions and sounds. That's and a knowing of it. Like that's pretty much it at the level of experience. But of course, when these elements kind of glue themselves together, it looks as if the image of your mother is your mother, as if that's what you're actually experiencing. So the artistry lies in being able to combine both of these perspectives. And sometimes also, just more conventional change work can do wonders. I remember many years ago, I had a female client who, her son, many years previously, they were walking in the woods, and he suddenly died in her arms. He just fell over and died. And he had a heart defect that none of them knew about. I think he was 13 or something like that. And that image of him dead in her arms was just haunting her, for years and years and years and years. So we did a new code change format. For those of you who are familiar with that, we kind of had her step into the context again, the memory, and hallucinate it, step back, do this new code game, which created a flow state, and we linked the flow state to the contextual triggers, and the image spontaneously changed into one of a felt sense of her son being with her, and that was the end of her grief. So the old NLP patterning, for example, where you do the submodality changes, can be very useful. I've had people who have had unresolved grief, and they've come in and I've done hypnotic regression work with them for some other issue, some fear, some issue, and the grief has spontaneously lifted. Also, in terms of loss, really looking at, what has been lost, and has something been lost, and where is the I that's lost something. These are very useful explorations to do with someone, using name it, find it, if a person is ready for it. So once again, hope this was useful, and feel free to leave your comments and ask questions. Okay.